The champagne glasses clinked with a sound that should have filled me with joy. But instead, my hands trembled as I adjusted the simple black dress and white apron I'd borrowed from my friend Maria. Standing in the hallway of my future mother-in-law's mansion, I took a deep breath and prepared to serve hors d'oeuvres to my own engagement party guests. This wasn't how I'd imagined spending the evening that was supposed to celebrate my upcoming marriage to David Thornton, the man I'd loved for 3 years. But something had been gnawing at me for weeks, a persistent feeling that something wasn't quite right. And tonight I was going to find out what it was. Let me backtrack a bit. My name is Emma Carter, and I'm a high school art teacher with a modest apartment in the city. I met David at a charity auction where I'd donated one of my paintings. He was charming, successful, and seemed genuinely interested in my work and my dreams. He ran a real estate development company that his family had built over 2 generations, and while his world was vastly different from mine, I thought we'd found a way to bridge that gap. For 3 years, our relationship had been a whirlwind of romantic dinners, weekend getaways, and deep conversations about our future. David proposed on a beach in Santorini, and I said yes without hesitation. That's when things started to change. His mother, Patricia Thornton, insisted on planning the engagement party at her estate. She assured me it would be intimate and elegant, just family and close friends. I should have known better. Patricia had never quite warmed to me, though she maintained a veneer of politeness whenever David was around. There were small comments here and there about my career choice, my family background, my taste in fashion. Nothing overtly cruel, but enough to make me feel like I was constantly being measured and found wanting. 2 weeks before the engagement party, I overheard a phone conversation that changed everything. I'd stopped by David's apartment unexpectedly and heard him talking in his study. The door was slightly ajar, and his tone was different from the warm, affectionate voice I knew. He sounded businesslike, almost cold. "I know, Mother. I'm handling it. The engagement party will be perfect. And yes, I'll make sure everything is in place for afterwards." There was a pause. She doesn't suspect anything. She's too trusting. My heart dropped. Who were they talking about? I wanted to believe it was about a business deal or a surprise he was planning for me, but something in his tone felt off. I quietly left before he noticed I'd been there. But the conversation haunted me. I tried to dismiss my concerns. I told myself I was being paranoid, that pre-wedding jitters were normal. But then Patricia called me 3 days before the party with an unusual request. She wanted to discuss the seating arrangements and asked me to come alone to her house while David was traveling for work. When I arrived, she led me to her opulent sitting room, where another woman was waiting, someone I'd never met before. Patricia introduced her as Melissa Worthington, an old family friend. Melissa was impeccably dressed, poised, and had the kind of pedigree that Patricia clearly approved of. She was also exactly the type of woman I imagined Patricia had always wanted David to marry. The conversation was strange. Patricia asked me pointed questions about my career plans after the wedding, whether I intended to continue teaching, and what I knew about managing a household of a certain standard. Melissa occasionally interjected with comments that felt like subtle barbs wrapped in pleasantries. I left that meeting feeling more unsettled than ever. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the phone conversation, Patricia's questions, and the strange dynamic with Melissa. My best friend Rachel came over after I called her in tears. As I poured out my concerns, she listened quietly, then made a suggestion that seemed crazy at first. What if you go to the engagement party as someone else? Not as the bride-to-be, but as an invisible observer. See how they act when they think you're not there. The idea was ridiculous. How could I possibly pull that off? But then I remembered Maria, another teacher at my school who occasionally worked catering jobs on weekends. She was roughly my height and build. If I could borrow her uniform and keep my head down, maybe I could blend in with the catering staff. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Patricia had hired an outside catering company I wasn't familiar with. The party was scheduled to have about 50 guests in a house large enough that servants could move through relatively unnoticed. If I styled my hair differently and wore minimal makeup, I might actually pull it off. I called Maria and explained a modified version of the truth, that I wanted to surprise my fiancé and needed her help. She was hesitant, but eventually agreed to lend me her spare uniform and give me some basic training on how to carry trays and interact with guests as staff. The evening arrived faster than I expected. I told David I was running late due to a last-minute issue with my dress and would meet him at the party. He seemed annoyed but accepted the excuse. I arrived at Patricia's mansion through the service entrance an hour before guests were due to arrive, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. The head caterer, a harried woman named Susan, barely glanced at me when I explained that Maria had sent me as her replacement. She thrust a tray of canapés into my hands and told me to circulate once guests started arriving. I kept my head down, my hair pulled back in a tight bun, and adopted a neutral expression. As guests began to filter in, I moved through the rooms like a ghost. It was surreal, watching people I knew, my own friends and family members, without being recognized. I saw my mother chatting with David's aunt, my college roommate admiring the floral arrangements. None of them looked at me twice. Then David arrived, looking handsome in his tailored suit. He scanned the room, presumably looking for me, then made his way to Patricia. I positioned myself near a potted palm where I could hear their conversation, while appearing to arrange glasses on a side table. "Where is she?" David asked, sounding irritated. "Oh, Emma called. Something about her dress. She'll be here soon," Patricia said dismissively. Then her voice dropped, and I had to strain to hear. "Are you absolutely certain about this? There's still time to reconsider." "Mother, we've been through this. Everything is arranged. I just think Melissa would have been—" "Mother." David's voice was sharp. "Stop. Please." I felt a chill run down my spine. What was arranged? Why was Patricia bringing up Melissa again? As the evening progressed, I circulated through different rooms, picking up fragments of conversations. David's business partner, Richard, was talking to another man I didn't recognize near the bar. "So the merger goes through right after the wedding?" the stranger asked. "That's the plan," Richard replied. "David's father-in-law's connections in the city planning department will be invaluable. The Riverside project will finally get approved." I almost dropped my tray. My father worked in the city planning department, but he was a mid-level administrator, not someone with the power to push through major development approvals, unless they were planning to use my relationship with him for something unethical. I moved to the terrace, where I found Melissa holding court with several of David's relatives. My blood ran cold when I heard what she was saying. "Well, I think it's admirable that David is thinking of his family's legacy. Not everyone would be willing to make such a strategic choice." She laughed lightly. "Though I suppose 3 years is a long time to wait for the right connections to materialize." One of David's cousins chimed in. "Patricia must be thrilled it's almost over. I know she never approved." "Oh, she's been a saint about it," Melissa agreed, planning this whole charade while knowing what comes after. But business is business, and the Thornton family has always understood that. My hands were shaking now. What came after? What charade? I retreated to the kitchen, trying to process what I'd heard. My mind was racing, connecting dots I'd been too naive or too in love to see before. Had David been using me this entire time? Was our relationship nothing more than a business arrangement to gain access to my father's position? Susan sent me back out with a tray of champagne glasses, just as Patricia clinked her glass to make a toast. I positioned myself at the back of the room, partially hidden behind other staff members, as everyone gathered around. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate David and Emma's engagement," Patricia began, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "It's been quite a journey, and we're so looking forward to the wedding in 3 months. 3 months. I'd wanted a longer engagement, but David and Patricia had insisted on a quick wedding, saying they'd already booked the perfect venue." Patricia continued, "Family is everything to us, and we're so pleased to welcome Emma and her family into ours. The connections and opportunities this union brings will benefit everyone." The way she said connections made my stomach turn. I glanced at my parents, who were beaming with pride, completely oblivious to the subtext dripping from Patricia's words. Then David took the microphone. "I want to thank my mother for putting together this beautiful evening. Emma should be here any minute." He checked his watch with a slight frown. "And I know she'll be overwhelmed by everyone's generosity and support." As he spoke, I watched his face carefully. This was the man I'd planned to spend my life with. The man who'd whispered promises about growing old together, about building a life based on love and mutual respect. But as I looked at him now, addressing a room full of people who seemed to know something I didn't, I saw a stranger. After his toast, David stepped away to take a phone call. I followed at a discreet distance and watched as he moved to Patricia's study, leaving the door slightly open. I positioned myself just outside, pretending to collect empty glasses from a nearby table. "Yes, I know she's late. I'm trying her phone now." Pause. "Look, Richard, the timeline doesn't change. We need this marriage to happen before the Planning Commission's vote in July. Once I'm family, her father won't have any choice but to help us with the zoning issues." Another pause. "Of course I care about her. But this is bigger than sentiment. This is about securing the Riverside project and the $50 million in investment it represents." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. There it was, laid out in plain terms. I wasn't a bride. I was a business asset. I don't remember making the conscious decision to walk into that study. One moment I was frozen in the hallway, and the next I was pushing the door open fully. David turned, phone still to his ear, and his face went white when he saw me. "I have to call you back," he said, ending the call. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. I was still wearing the maid's uniform, my hair pinned back, my face makeup-free. He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. And maybe he was. Not as the convenient connection he'd cultivated, but as a real person whose heart he'd broken. "Emma?" His voice cracked. Why are you dressed like that?" "I wanted to see the truth," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "And I did. Whatever you think you heard." "Stop." I held up my hand. "Just stop, David. I heard everything. Richard, the Riverside Project, my father's position, 3 years of my life, and it was all a lie." He stepped toward me and I stepped back. "It's not like that. I do love you, Emma. The business aspect doesn't change that." "Doesn't change it?" I felt tears starting, but I blinked them away. "It defines it. You calculated our entire relationship like a business deal. Was any of it real? The trip to Santorini? The late-night conversations about art and dreams? Or was that all just part of your investment strategy? You're being unfair. Relationships have practical aspects. My parents' marriage started as a business arrangement, and they learned to love each other." "Learn to love each other?" I repeated incredulously. "David, I already loved you. Past tense. Because the man I loved doesn't exist. He was just a character you played." The door opened behind me, and Patricia swept in, taking in the scene with barely concealed annoyance. "Emma, dear, what an interesting choice of attire. I assume there's an explanation?" "There is," I said, turning to face her. "I wanted to see how you all behaved when you thought I wasn't watching. Congratulations. You all gave quite a performance." Patricia's expression hardened. "I don't know what you think you discovered, but I discovered that you've been planning to use me and my family for a real estate deal. That your son proposed to me not because he loved me, but because my father works in city planning. That this whole engagement party is really just a celebration of a business merger." "You're being hysterical," Patricia said coldly. "David, handle this." But David just stood there, looking defeated. "She knows, Mother. She heard the phone call." "Then we'll explain the situation rationally," Patricia began, but I cut her off. "There's nothing to explain. It's very clear, and it's over." I reached for my engagement ring, and David finally moved, grabbing my hand. "Emma, please. Don't do this here. Let's talk privately. There's nothing to talk about." I pulled my hand away and removed the ring, setting it on Patricia's antique desk. "I'm sorry I wasted 3 years of your investment timeline, but I won't be part of your business deal." I walked out of that study and through the mansion, my head held high despite the tears streaming down my face. The party was still in full swing. Through the doorway, I could see my parents, my friends, all celebrating a future that was never real. I found Rachel in the crowd. She'd come early to support me. When she saw me in the maid's uniform with tears on my face, she understood immediately. She grabbed her purse and followed me out without a word. We were almost to the service entrance when I heard David calling my name. I turned to see him standing in the hallway, looking genuinely anguished for the first time that evening. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "You're right about all of it. I don't expect forgiveness, but I am sorry." "So am I," I replied. "I'm sorry I wasn't enough just as myself. I'm sorry you couldn't see that what we could have built together was worth more than any business deal." I left without looking back, Rachel's arm around my shoulders. The drive back to my apartment was silent. When we got inside, Rachel made tea while I finally allowed myself to break down completely. The next morning, I called my parents and explained everything. They were shocked and furious. My father immediately launched an investigation into his department to ensure no impropriety had occurred. The fallout was significant. Several people from the party contacted me, having noticed my sudden appearance and departure. When the truth came out, David's reputation in our social circle suffered tremendously. His business partners distanced themselves from the Riverside Project, worried about the ethical implications. Patricia tried to do damage control, spreading rumors that I'd had a breakdown and misunderstood an innocent conversation. But enough people had heard fragments of the truth that night that her narrative never quite took hold. As for David, I heard through mutual friends that he was genuinely devastated. Whether he mourned the loss of our relationship or the loss of his business opportunity, I'll never know. Part of me wanted to believe that somewhere in our 3 years together, there had been real feelings. But I learned that trying to parse truth from manipulation in a fundamentally dishonest relationship is a waste of energy. The hardest part was grieving not just the relationship, but the future I'd imagined. I'd pictured our wedding, our home, the family we might have started. All of it was gone, revealed as nothing more than a mirage. But I also felt something unexpected. Relief. The nagging doubt I'd felt for months was validated. My instincts had been right. And by trusting them, I'd saved myself from a marriage that would have been built on deception. 6 months later, I'm in a different place, literally and figuratively. I took a sabbatical from teaching and spent 2 months traveling through Europe, reconnecting with myself and my art. I painted more than I had in years, creating pieces that reflected my journey from heartbreak to healing. When I returned, I started therapy to work through the betrayal and understand why I'd ignored red flags for so long. I learned about my own patterns, my tendency to see the best in people even when evidence suggested otherwise. It's a quality I don't want to lose entirely. Optimism and trust are gifts, but I learned to balance them with healthy skepticism and stronger boundaries. My career has flourished in unexpected ways. The paintings I created during my travels led to a gallery show, and I sold several pieces. The experience reminded me that I have value independent of any relationship, that my art and my work matter. Dating feels impossible right now, and I'm okay with that. I'm learning to be content with my own company, to build a life that feels fulfilling without needing someone else to complete it. Maybe someday I'll be ready to trust someone again. But for now, I'm focused on trusting myself. Looking back on that night, standing in a borrowed uniform, serving champagne at my own engagement party, it seems almost surreal. But I'm grateful I had the courage to seek the truth, even though it shattered everything I thought I knew. I learned that love without honesty is just a beautiful lie. I learned that sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same. And I learned that I'm stronger than I ever gave myself credit for. If I could go back and talk to the Emma who said yes to David's proposal on that beach in Santorini, I'd tell her to trust her instincts. I'd tell her that she deserves someone who loves her for who she is, not what she can provide. I'd tell her that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from what you thought you wanted in pursuit of what you actually deserve. The engagement party I crashed was supposed to celebrate the beginning of my new life. In a way, it did. Just not the life anyone expected.